The millionaire George always knew that his daughter had a strong and untamable personality. Determined to protect the family's reputation, he decided to force her to marry, choosing the humble gardener as the groom. What George did not expect was that on the wedding day, his daughter would make a surprising revelation. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. The rising sun cast its first rays over the small town, illuminating the quiet streets and the elegant mansions that stood imposingly in the most affluent neighbourhoods. Among them, the sumptuous residence of the Walker family stood out, a true palace of marble and glass that seemed to defy the laws of architecture with its bold lines and ostentatious luxury. Inside the mansion, George Walker, the patriarch of the family and a business tycoon, was having his breakfast while absently flipping through the local newspaper. At 55 years old, George was a man of intimidating presence, with eyes as cold as steel and a perpetually stern expression. His grey hair, impeccably combed back, and his custom-tailored suit reinforced his aura of power and authority. George was known and feared throughout the region. His influence extended far beyond the limits of his business, infiltrating local politics and dictating the trends of the town's economy. His volatile temperament and arbitrary decisions were legendary, making even the bravest tremble in his presence. Outside the mansion, in the extensive gardens that surrounded the property, Paul Thompson, the young gardener, worked diligently under the morning sun. At only 25 years old, Paul was the epitome of humility and hard work. His dishevelled hair and simple clothes starkly contrasted with the luxurious environment around him. Despite his modest appearance, Paul possessed a sharp intellect and a generous heart. Orphaned from a young age, he had fought against all odds to build an honourable life. His job as a gardener at the Walker mansion was a source of pride, even though the treatment he received from George was often harsh and disrespectful. Upstairs in the mansion, Alicia Walker was waking up slowly, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. At 21, Alicia was a young woman of radiant beauty, with long golden hair and eyes full of life. Her sweet and compassionate personality was in stark contrast to her father's coldness. Alicia had always been a source of frustration for George. Her refusal to blindly follow the plans he had laid for her future and her insistence on treating the mansion's staff with respect and consideration were constant points of contention between father and daughter. That morning, however, Alicia carried a secret that made her heart pound with fear and anticipation. She knew she couldn't hide it much longer, but she dreaded her father's reaction when the truth came out. With hesitant steps, Alicia descended the stairs towards the dining room. Her stomach twisted with nervousness, but she knew it was time to face the situation. Upon entering the room, she found her father seated at the head of the table as usual. "Good morning, Dad," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. George looked up from the newspaper, his penetrating gaze examining his daughter for a moment before responding with a curt nod. Alicia took a deep breath, gathering all her courage. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." The serious tone in his daughter's voice made George put down the newspaper, frowning. "What is it, Alicia? I hope it's not another one of your silly ideas about volunteer work or whatever." "No, Dad, it's something more personal." She paused, feeling her heart race. "I'm pregnant." The ensuing silence was deafening. George stayed still for a few seconds, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Then slowly a storm began to form in his eyes. "What?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "How is that possible? Who is the father?" Alicia swallowed hard but remained firm. "I won't say who the father is, Dad. That doesn't matter now because you wouldn't approve of our relationship. I will reveal it at the right time. What matters is that I am going to have this baby and—" "Not going to say?" George interrupted, his voice rising. "Do you have any idea of the scandal this will cause? The shame it will bring to this family?" George's words hit Alicia like a slap, but she refused to back down. "There is no shame in having a child, Dad. and I don't care what people will say." George stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "You may not care, but I do. I built all of this," he gestured broadly, indicating the mansion around them, "and I will not allow you to ruin our reputation with your irresponsibility." Alicia felt tears forming in her eyes, but she held them back. "I'm sorry if this disappoints you, Dad, but this is my decision. I am going to have this baby and raise it with all the love I can give." George stared at her for long moments, his mind working furiously. Then, without saying anything more, he stormed out of the room, leaving Alicia alone with her thoughts and fears. In the days that followed, the tension in the Walker mansion was palpable. George locked himself in his office for hours on end, emerging only to cast furious glances at his daughter. Alicia, on the other hand, tried to keep calm, focusing on the preparations for the baby's arrival. It was on a particularly hot afternoon that George finally summoned Alicia for a conversation. She entered her father's office with a heavy heart, fearing what was to come. "Sit down," George ordered, indicating the chair in front of his desk. When Alicia obeyed, he continued, "I have thought a lot about our situation, and I have come to a solution." Alicia felt a chill down her spine. "What solution, Dad?" "Marriage," he declared, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're going to get married, and soon. That way we can at least save appearances." The shock left Alicia momentarily speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was trembling with indignation. "Marry? But I can't just marry anyone. What about the father of my child? We have plans for a life together and—" George made a dismissive gesture. "Since you refuse to reveal who this individual is, I have taken the liberty of choosing a suitable husband for you." Panic began to overtake Alicia. "You can't do this. I am of legal age. I have the right to—" "You have the right to do as I say!" George thundered, slamming his hand on the table. "Unless you want to be disinherited and thrown out of this house without a penny." Alicia felt as if the air had been ripped from her lungs. She knew her father was capable of fulfilling that threat, and the idea of facing the world alone, pregnant and without resources, was terrifying. "Who?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Who did you choose?" A cold smile formed on George's lips. "The gardener, Paul. I just spoke with him and he agreed." The mention of Paul's name made Alicia's heart skip a beat. "Paul?" she repeated, surprised. "But why?" George leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. "The young man is hard-working and obedient. Besides, he accepted my proposal without hesitation. In exchange for the marriage, he will receive a position in the company and will be able to provide a decent life for you and the child." I understand," Alicia said, lowering her eyes. "If this is how it has to be, I accept." George nodded, clearly satisfied with his own cleverness. "Great. The wedding will be in 2 weeks. Make the necessary preparations." In the weeks leading up to the wedding, the Walker mansion turned into a whirlwind of activity. Decorators, florists, and event organisers were constantly coming and going, all under the watchful eye of George, who insisted that everything be perfect to maintain appearances. Alicia and Paul had barely any opportunities to meet. Finally, the big day arrived. The Walker estate had been transformed into a fairy tale setting, with white and gold flowers adorning every available surface. A large white pavilion had been erected in the gardens, where the ceremony would take place. As the guests began to arrive, George supervised the final details, making sure everything was impeccable. He was determined to turn what he considered an embarrassing situation into a demonstration of power and influence. In Alicia's room, the bride was getting ready with the help of her bridesmaids. Her dress, an elegant and simple design, highlighted her natural beauty and subtly disguised the slight curve of her belly. On the other side of the mansion, Paul was nervously adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. The suit that George had insisted on buying for him felt strange and uncomfortable, so different from his usual clothes. But he knew that this discomfort was a small price to pay for the future that awaited him. When the music began to play, announcing the start of the ceremony, an expectant silence fell over the assembly. George took his place next to the aisle, ready to walk his daughter down the aisle. The moment Alicia appeared at the pavilion entrance was breathtaking. She seemed to radiate her own light, her radiant smile illuminating the entire space. Paul, upon seeing her, felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. George, observing the scene, felt an uncomfortable sensation that he couldn't identify. There was something in the exchanged look between Alicia and Paul that disturbed him. He didn't think the couple would be so happy with that arranged marriage. The ceremony was moving, with Alicia and Paul exchanging vows with voices choked with emotion. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the joy on their faces was genuine and contagious. It was during the reception that the truth began to unfold. George, observing the couple, was satisfied with the apparent success of his plan. He was preparing for a carefully rehearsed speech when he noticed something that made him freeze in place. Paul and Alicia were holding hands, their fingers intertwined in a manner that indicated intimacy and familiarity. It was not the hesitant touch of two strangers forced into a marriage of convenience, but the affectionate gesture of a deeply in love couple. The realization struck George like lightning. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in his mind. Exchanged glances, the too quick acceptance by both of them to the arrangement, the radiant happiness that emanated from them throughout the ceremony. "You," he started, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "You already knew each other. You were together this whole time." Alicia, gathering all her courage, took a step forward. "Yes, Dad. Paul and I have loved each other for a long time. He is the father of my child." George, his face passing through a range of emotions from fury to disbelief, seemed about to explode. "How dare you deceive me like this?" he roared, his face red with rage. "You," he pointed at Paul, "a mere gardener, had the audacity to get involved with my daughter?" Paul remained calm in the face of the storm. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice firm, "I love your daughter with all my heart. We did not plan to deceive you. In fact, your arrangement gave us the opportunity we so desired to be together openly." George staggered as if he had taken a physical blow. The irony of the situation did not escape him. In his attempt to punish his daughter and maintain control, he had inadvertently united the couple in a way they would never have managed on their own. "Dad," Alicia intervened, her voice soft but determined. "I know this is not what you planned, but please try to understand. Paul is a good, hard-working and honest man. He loves me and will be a wonderful father to our child." For long moments, the patriarch of the Walkers stood still. Finally, a bitter laugh escaped his lips. "Well played," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "Well played indeed." Turning to the guests and asking for silence, George raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice laden with a mixture of resignation and reluctant admiration, "a toast to the newlyweds." In the months that followed, life at the Walker mansion underwent significant changes. Paul took on responsibilities in George's company. To his father-in-law's surprise and frustration, he demonstrated a natural aptitude for business, bringing new ideas and a fresh perspective that soon began to bear fruit. Under Paul's influence, many of the questionable practices that George had implemented over the years began to be reviewed. Employees who once trembled with fear before the boss began to experience a fairer and more respectful work environment. Alicia, radiant in her advanced pregnancy, watched with pride the transformations her husband was promoting. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that her father would still fight against changes to his old habits, but she was determined to support Paul every step of the way. George, in turn, found himself in a state of constant internal conflict. On one hand, his wounded pride and shaken sense of control made him resist the changes. On the other hand, he could not deny the positive results that the new policies were bringing to his business. The millionaire, who had always prided himself on his cunning and ability to manipulate situations to his advantage, had been outdone by the sagacity and true love of his own daughter and the man he once considered inferior. This lesson in humility, though initially bitter, proved to be the greatest gift he could have received. The story illustrates that those who consider themselves very clever and try to manipulate others can get caught in their own traps, evidencing that arrogance can lead to unexpected consequences. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.